"You need to understand something," my son-in-law said, his voice dripping with contempt as he blocked my path to what used to be my husband's study. "This is not your house anymore." Those 8 words shattered everything I thought I knew about family, respect, and the home I'd built with my own hands over 30 years ago. But what he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I'd been watching, recording, planning. For 3 years, I'd been treated like an unwelcome guest in the house, where I'd raised my children, where I'd nursed my husband through his final illness, where every corner held memories of a life well lived. My daughter stood behind him, saying nothing, her eyes avoiding mine like they had for months. But that moment, that cruel, calculated moment when he tried to erase me from my own story, was when I decided enough was enough. You see, while they thought they were slowly pushing me towards some nursing home, I'd been 3 steps ahead. The security cameras I'd installed weren't just for protection. They were for justice. What happened next would teach them that underestimating a 62-year-old woman who'd survived loss, betrayal, and heartbreak was the biggest mistake of their lives. Some people think age makes you weak. They're about to learn how wrong they are. This is the story of how I took back everything that was always mine, and why my son-in-law will never forget the day he tried to steal my life. My name is Margaret, and until 3 years ago, I thought I understood what family meant. I'm 62, a retired high school principal who spent 40 years shaping young minds and building a life that I was proud of. My husband Robert and I bought our 4-bedroom colonial in 1994, back when the neighborhood was just starting to bloom. We painted every wall, planted every flower, and filled every room with love and laughter. Robert passed away 4 years ago after a brutal 18-month battle with pancreatic cancer. I was his caregiver, his advocate, his everything during those final months. We'd been married for 35 years, and losing him felt like losing half of my soul. The house, once filled with his terrible dad jokes and the smell of his weekend pancakes, became a monument to memories I wasn't ready to let go of. My daughter Sarah is my only child. We struggled with fertility for years before she came along, making her even more precious to us. She's 34 now, a marketing coordinator who inherited her father's gentle nature and my stubborn streak. When she married David 3 years ago, I was genuinely happy for her. He seemed charming enough during their 2-year courtship, polite, well-dressed, with a decent job in finance, and ambitious plans for the future. The wedding was beautiful, held in our backyard under the oak tree Robert had planted when Sarah was born. I remember thinking how proud Robert would have been, walking her down the aisle in his place. David's vows were eloquent, promising to love and protect Sarah forever. His family seemed nice enough, though I noticed they were more concerned with appearances than substance. After the honeymoon, Sarah and David faced a harsh reality. The housing market was brutal, and their combined student loans made buying a home nearly impossible. When Sarah tearfully explained their situation over Sunday dinner, my heart broke for them. They were living in a cramped 1-bedroom apartment, and Sarah had been talking about starting a family. "Why don't you move in here temporarily?" I offered, the words tumbling out before I could second-guess myself. "Just until you get on your feet. The house is too big for just me anyway." Sarah's face lit up like Christmas morning. "Mom, are you serious? That would be incredible." David seemed pleased too, though I caught something in his expression I couldn't quite read. "That's very generous, Margaret. We'd pay rent, of course." "Nonsense," I waved him off. "Your family. Just help with utilities and groceries." Looking back, that moment of maternal generosity was the first domino in a chain reaction that would nearly destroy everything I held dear. But at the time, all I saw was my daughter's relief and the chance to fill my empty house with life again. They moved in 2 weeks later, bringing boxes of wedding gifts and dreams of saving for their own place. I converted Robert's study into a temporary storage room for their extra furniture, though I kept his desk and bookshelf exactly as he'd left them. Some spaces, I told them, were sacred. For the first few months, it actually worked beautifully. Sarah would cook dinner while I graded papers. I was still substitute teaching then. And David would handle the yard work Robert used to love. We'd watch movies together on Friday nights, and I started to believe that maybe, just maybe, this arrangement could heal the loneliness that had been eating at me since Robert's death. The house felt alive again. Sarah's laughter echoed through the halls, and I found myself looking forward to coming home each day. David was helpful and respectful, always asking before making any changes and insisting on contributing to household expenses despite my protests. I should have known it was too good to last. I should have seen the signs earlier, should have trusted the little voice in my head that whispered warnings I chose to ignore. But grief makes you vulnerable, and loneliness makes you blind to red flags that should have been obvious. What I didn't realize was that David wasn't just moving into my house. He was studying it, mapping it, and planning to make it his own. But everything began to change when David started working from home 6 months after they moved in. What began as occasional suggestions about the house slowly evolved into something more controlling, more possessive. It started innocently enough. "Margaret, would you mind if we moved this antique cabinet? It's blocking the natural light in the living room," David would say, his tone reasonable and polite. When I hesitated, that cabinet had been Robert's grandmother's. Sarah would chime in with, "Mom, it would really open up the space. We could put it in the basement for now." For now. Those 2 words should have been my first warning. David had a way of making his requests sound logical, even considerate. He'd researched property values and home staging techniques, speaking with the authority of someone who understood these things better than a sentimental old woman like me. When I'd express reluctance about moving Robert's favorite armchair or changing the family photos on the mantel, David would exchange glances with Sarah, looks that made me feel like I was being unreasonable. "We're not trying to erase Dad's memory," Sarah would say gently, her hand on my shoulder. "We just want to make the space work for all of us." The changes were gradual, almost surgical in their precision. Robert's reading chair disappeared one day while I was at the grocery store. "We had it reupholstered as a surprise," Sarah announced cheerfully. "It's at the shop for 2 weeks." But 2 weeks became a month, then 2 months, and eventually I stopped asking about it. David had opinions about everything. The thermostat settings. 68 degrees is really wasteful, Margaret. My gardening choices. Those roses are blocking the view from the kitchen window. Even my daily routines. Maybe you could do your morning yoga in the basement. The living room gets such good light for Sarah's work calls. I began to notice how conversations would stop when I entered rooms. How David and Sarah would speak in hushed tones that fell silent the moment I appeared. There were frequent discussions about the house that I wasn't included in. Decisions being made about my own home without my input. The most painful change was how my relationship with Sarah began to deteriorate. My once close daughter became distant, distracted. Our Sunday morning coffee talks, a tradition since she was 16, became sporadic, then stopped altogether. When I'd try to bring up concerns about the changes happening around us, she'd get defensive. "David's just trying to help, Mom. He has good ideas about maximizing space and efficiency. But this is still my house, sweetheart. Don't you think I should have a say in—" "Of course it's your house," she'd interrupt, but her tone suggested she was tired of having this conversation. No one's saying it isn't, but that's exactly what was happening. One small concession at a time. David had a talent for making me feel selfish for wanting to preserve the life Robert and I had built. He'd frame his suggestions as improvements, as ways to honor Robert's memory by making the house more livable. The breaking point came when I discovered they'd been showing the house to a real estate agent. I came home early from a doctor's appointment to find a strange woman with a clipboard taking photos of my living room while David pointed out original hardwood floors and updated fixtures. "What's going on here?" I demanded, my voice sharper than I'd intended. David didn't even look embarrassed. "Oh, Margaret, we were just getting a market assessment, for insurance purposes. Sarah mentioned you hadn't updated your policy since Robert passed." The real estate agent looked uncomfortable, clearly sensing tension she hadn't expected. "I'll just finish up in the kitchen," she mumbled, escaping the room. "Insurance purposes?" I repeated, my heart pounding. "Since when do insurance assessments require real estate agents?" Sarah appeared from upstairs, her face flushed. "Mom, we can explain. Explain what? That you're pricing my house behind my back. That night, after the agent left and David retreated to make some work calls, Sarah and I had our first real fight in years. She accused me of being paranoid and controlling. I accused her of letting her husband manipulate her into betraying her own mother. "He's not manipulating me," she shouted. "He's planning for our future, something you seem determined to sabotage." As I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling of the bedroom I'd shared with Robert for decades, I realized that David wasn't just changing my house. He was changing my daughter, turning her against me one calculated move at a time. That's when I decided to start paying closer attention to what was really happening in my own home. The real awakening came 3 weeks later, during what I now call the Thanksgiving incident. David had invited his parents and siblings for dinner without consulting me, in my own dining room using my grandmother's china, as if he were the host, and I was merely a guest who happened to live there. I discovered this when his mother called me directly. "Margaret, dear, David told us you were so excited to host Thanksgiving this year. Should I bring my famous sweet potato casserole?" My blood ran cold. I hadn't agreed to host anything. When I confronted David about it, he had the audacity to look surprised. "Oh, didn't Sarah mention it? We thought it would be nice for you to have company. You've seemed so lonely lately." Lonely in my own house, because they'd systematically isolated me from my own life. But I smiled and played along, deciding this would be my chance to observe them more carefully. What I witnessed that day was a masterclass in psychological manipulation. David introduced me to his family as Sarah's mother, who's been so generous letting us stay here while we save for our own place. The way he said it made me sound like a charity case they were humoring. His father, a pompous man who owned several rental properties, spent the entire meal giving me unsolicited advice about maximizing my investment. "You know, Margaret, this house has incredible potential. With the right updates, you could easily add another 100,000 to its value." "I'm not looking to sell," I replied firmly. David's mother, a woman who clearly believed she was being helpful, patted my hand condescendingly. "Oh, but dear, at your age, wouldn't a nice condo be more practical? Less maintenance, better security?" I watched Sarah's face during these conversations. My daughter, my own flesh and blood, said nothing. She just nodded along as her in-laws discussed my future, as if I weren't sitting right there. After dinner, while I was cleaning up, because apparently hosting also meant serving, I overheard David on the phone in Robert's study. The door was cracked and his voice carried clearly. "No, she's not ready to discuss it yet, but Sarah's working on her. Yeah, the market assessment came back even higher than we thought. Trust me, by spring she'll see that it's the best option for everyone." My hands shook as I set down the plate I'd been washing. They weren't just planning to push me out, they were planning to profit from it. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. I ordered a security system online, the kind with hidden cameras that could be monitored remotely. When the technician came to install it the following week, I told Sarah and David it was for peace of mind after some break-ins in the neighborhood. "Smart thinking, Margaret," David said approvingly. "Security is so important for someone living alone. Someone living alone. In a house with 3 people. The cameras revealed things that made my stomach turn. David going through my financial documents when I was out. Sarah packing away more of Robert's belongings to make room. Conversations about my declining mental state and how I was becoming a burden. But the worst discovery came 2 weeks later. I was watching the footage from Robert's study when I saw David on the phone again, this time with someone he called the lawyer. "She's definitely showing signs of confusion," he was saying, sitting in Robert's chair like he owned it. Sarah's documented several incidents, forgetting conversations, misplacing things, getting agitated over minor changes. "Yes, we think it's time to explore our options regarding her competency." My blood turned to ice. They weren't just planning to take my house. They were planning to have me declared mentally incompetent to do it. I sat in my car in the grocery store parking lot, watching this footage on my phone, and felt something I hadn't experienced since Robert's diagnosis. Pure, crystallizing rage. These people This man I'd welcomed into my home and my daughter who I'd raised to be better than this were plotting to steal my life, my dignity, my very identity. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd underestimated exactly who they were dealing with. I'd spent 40 years managing teenagers, dealing with helicopter parents, and navigating school board politics. I knew how to plan, how to document, and how to wait for exactly the right moment to strike. David wanted to play games? Fine, but he was about to learn that he'd picked the wrong opponent. The moment of reckoning came on a cold February morning, exactly 3 years after they'd moved in. I'd been watching, documenting, and preparing for months. David had grown increasingly bold, treating me like an unwelcome intruder in my own home. But that morning, he crossed a line that I couldn't ignore. I'd woken up early to visit Robert's study, something I did every morning as part of my grief ritual. I kept one corner exactly as he'd left it. His desk with his reading glasses, his favorite coffee mug, and the last book he'd been reading. It was my sacred space, my connection to the love of my life. But when I opened the door, the corner was empty, completely stripped bare. I found David in the kitchen, calmly drinking coffee and scrolling through his phone. Sarah was upstairs getting ready for work. "Where are Robert's things?" I asked, my voice surprisingly steady, despite the hurricane of emotions inside me. David looked up with practiced innocence. "What things?" "His desk items, his glasses, his book, everything from his corner." David sighed like I was a child asking about a broken toy. "Margaret, we talked about this. Sarah thought it was time to finish clearing out that space. It's been 4 years. "We never talked about anything," I interrupted. "And it's been 4 years since he died. Not since his things stopped mattering." "Look." David stood up, and I saw something shift in his demeanor. The mask of politeness was slipping. "I understand you're upset, but you need to understand something." He stepped closer, his voice taking on a tone I'd never heard before. Cold, authoritative, final. "This is not your house anymore." The words hung in the air like a slap. Behind him, I heard Sarah's footsteps stop on the stairs. She'd heard it too. "Excuse me?" I whispered. "You heard me." David's facade had completely dropped now. "Sarah and I have been carrying this place for 3 years. We pay the utilities, we maintain the property, we deal with the repairs. You're living here out of our generosity, not the other way around." I felt something break inside me. Not my spirit, but my last restraint. "Get out!" David actually laughed. "Get out? Margaret, I think you're confused about who has the authority here. Maybe it's time we had that conversation about your declining situation." That's when Sarah appeared in the doorway, her face pale. "David, what are you—" "Tell her, Sarah," David commanded, not taking his eyes off me. "Tell her about the lawyer. Tell her about the competency evaluation we've been discussing." My daughter's face crumpled. "Mom, we're just worried about you. You've been forgetting things, getting confused." "I've been forgetting things?" I repeated, my voice rising. "Or have you been gaslighting me for 3 years? That's exactly the kind of paranoid thinking we're talking about," David said smoothly. "Sarah called Dr. Peterson. I think it's time for that intervention we discussed." But I was done being their victim. I pulled out my phone and opened the security app, turning the screen toward them. "Before you make that call, David, there's something you both need to see." I pressed play on the footage from 2 days ago. David in Robert's study, on the phone with his lawyer, discussing my mental decline and their plans to have me declared incompetent. Sarah's face went white as she heard her husband's voice. "She's definitely losing it. Sarah's been documenting everything. We should have enough for a competency hearing by spring." "What is this?" Sarah whispered. "This," I said, swiping to the next video, "is your husband going through my financial documents." Another swipe. "This is him researching nursing homes." Another swipe. "And this is him telling his parents that the house will be ours by summer." David's face had gone from confident to panicked. "You've been spying on us?" "I've been protecting myself," I corrected. "In my own home, which by the way is still legally mine, as these property documents will show." I pulled out a folder I'd prepared months ago. "Funny thing about competency evaluations, David. They require actual medical evidence, not just the word of a manipulative son-in-law. Sarah was staring at the phone screen, watching her husband's betrayal play out in high definition. The real question now, I continued, my voice steady as steel, is whether you leave voluntarily, or whether I call the police and show them these videos of you stealing my property and conspiring to commit fraud. David's mask was completely gone now, replaced by something ugly and desperate. You can't prove anything. I smiled for the first time in months. Actually, David, I can prove everything. The silence that followed was deafening. David stood frozen, his face cycling through emotions, shock, anger, calculation, and finally, something that looked almost like fear. Sarah had sunk into a kitchen chair, still staring at my phone, as if it might change what she'd just witnessed. Mom, Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. How long have you been recording us? Long enough, I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. Long enough to document 3 years of systematic manipulation, theft, and conspiracy. David's recovery was swift, his lawyer instincts kicking in. This is illegal surveillance. You can't record people without their consent? Actually, I can, I interrupted, pulling out another document from my folder. This is my house, and I posted notice of security cameras in 3 visible locations. You both signed acknowledgement forms when you moved in. I have your signatures right here. The forms were real. I'd had them drafted by my own lawyer months ago and quietly added them to the household paperwork. David had signed them without reading, too arrogant to imagine I might be protecting myself. Sarah looked up at me with eyes I didn't recognize, wounded, confused, but also something else, something that might have been respect. You planned this. I survived this, I corrected. There's a difference. David was pacing now, his composure completely shattered. You don't understand the financial reality here, Margaret. This house is too much for you. The maintenance costs alone are none of your business, I finished. Just like my bank accounts, my medical records, and my future plans. But we've invested 3 years here, David exploded. We've improved the property value. You've lived rent-free in a house worth $400,000 while plotting to steal it from me, I said calmly. I'd say you got a pretty good deal. That's when Sarah finally spoke up, her voice stronger than before. David, stop! He whirled on her. Stop! Sarah, she's been spying on us, recording our private conversations. This is exactly the kind of paranoid behavior that proves she was right to protect herself. Sarah said quietly, standing up. God, David, listening to yourself on that recording, is that really what you think of me? That I'm just some tool to help you manipulate my own mother? David's expression shifted, recognizing the danger. Sarah, honey, you're upset. You're not thinking clearly. Don't! Sarah held up her hand. Don't you dare tell me I'm not thinking clearly. I've been thinking clearly for the first time in months. I watched my daughter, really watched her, and saw something I hadn't seen in years. The Sarah I'd raised, the one with a spine. You want to know what's really sick? Sarah continued, her voice gaining strength. I actually started to believe you. About Mom being confused, about her needing help. I started documenting things that seemed off, just like you asked. But now I realize, you were creating those situations, weren't you? David's silence was answer enough. The missing keys that turned up in weird places. The bills that went unpaid even though Mom swore she'd handled them. The appointments she forgot that you'd never actually told her about. Sarah's voice was rising. You were gaslighting both of us. Sarah, you're being dramatic. Am I? She turned to me. Mom, show him the rest. I'd been hoping it wouldn't come to this, but Sarah was right. I swiped to the final video. David going through my purse, taking my car keys and hiding them in the basement. Then later, finding them and suggesting I was becoming forgetful. You son of a bitch, Sarah breathed. David tried one last manipulation. Sarah, think about our future, our plans, the family we want to start. What family? Sarah laughed bitterly. You mean the family you were planning to build on the foundation of my mother's stolen home? The family you were going to fund with money from having her declared incompetent? It's not like that. It's exactly like that. Sarah walked over to me, and for the first time in months, I saw my daughter clearly. Mom, I'm so sorry. I don't know how I let this happen. You trusted someone you loved, I said gently. That's not a character flaw, sweetheart. But David wasn't done. Fine, he snarled, his true nature finally emerging. You want to play hardball? I'll call my lawyer. I'll sue for emotional distress, for illegal surveillance, for what? I asked calmly. For being caught committing elder abuse? For conspiracy to commit fraud? For theft? I pulled out one final document. Because I've already spoken to my lawyer, David, and to the district attorney's office. They're very interested in your activities. The color drained from his face. You wouldn't. Try me, I said. You have until tomorrow morning to remove your belongings from my house. After that, I'm filing charges. David looked at Sarah one last time, perhaps hoping for support that would never come. Don't look at me, Sarah said coldly. I'll help you pack. 6 months later, I'm sitting in Robert's study, fully restored to exactly how he left it, writing this story. The morning sun streams through windows that no longer feel like prison bars, and the house feels like home again. David left the next morning with nothing but his clothes and his car. He tried to take some of the furniture they'd brought, but Sarah stopped him. Consider it payment for 3 years of free rent, she told him. The divorce papers were filed 2 weeks later. Sarah moved out too, but not in anger, in healing. She found a small apartment downtown and started therapy to process what she now recognizes as 3 years of psychological manipulation. We have coffee every Sunday morning again, and slowly, carefully, we're rebuilding what David tried to destroy. I keep thinking about all the signs I missed, she told me last week. How did I not see what he was doing? Because predators are good at what they do, I replied. They don't target the weak, they target the trusting. And there's nothing wrong with being trusting, sweetheart. The legal aftermath was swift and decisive. David's lawyer quickly advised him to accept a restraining order rather than face criminal charges for elder abuse and fraud. The evidence was overwhelming. 3 years of documented manipulation, theft, and conspiracy. He moved back to his parents' house in another state, and I haven't heard from him since. But the real transformation wasn't in the legal victory. It was in what I learned about myself. For 3 years, I'd allowed grief and loneliness to make me vulnerable to manipulation. I'd been so desperate to feel needed, to fill the empty spaces Robert left behind, that I'd nearly given away everything we'd built together. The security cameras are still there, but now they're just for actual security. I've learned to trust my instincts again, to value my own judgment. When someone tells you you're confused or paranoid for noticing their bad behavior, that's usually proof that you're seeing clearly. I've also learned that family isn't just about blood. It's about respect, honesty, and genuine care. David was legally family for 3 years, but he never acted like it. Meanwhile, my neighbor Mrs. Chen, who checks on me weekly and brings me soup when I'm sick, is more family than he ever was. The house itself has been transformed too. I've redecorated with joy instead of grief, adding new memories while honoring old ones. Robert's study remains his sanctuary, but the rest of the house is alive again, not with the desperate energy of people plotting against me, but with the peaceful energy of a woman who knows her worth. I've started volunteering at the senior center, helping other older adults recognize signs of financial abuse and manipulation. It's shocking how common these stories are. Adult children, in-laws, and caregivers who see vulnerability as opportunity. But it's also inspiring to see how many people, when given the right information and support, can reclaim their power. Sarah has become an advocate too. She speaks at workshops about how manipulation can affect family relationships, how good people can be turned against each other by those with selfish motives. Her courage in facing what happened, in admitting her mistakes, and working to prevent others from making them, makes me proud every day. The financial impact was significant. 3 years of supporting 2 additional adults, plus the cost of legal fees and security systems. But the emotional cost would have been devastating if I hadn't fought back. My independence, my dignity, my very sense of self were all under attack. The money was just money. My life was irreplaceable. To anyone reading this who sees themselves in my story, trust your instincts. If someone is making you feel crazy for noticing their behavior, pay attention to that feeling. If family members are suddenly concerned about your declining abilities, right around the time they start asking about your assets, that's not a coincidence. Document everything. Keep records. Don't let anyone isolate you from friends, activities, or support systems. And remember, asking for help isn't weakness. It's wisdom. Most importantly, remember that age doesn't make you powerless. Experience is a weapon, wisdom is armor, and the willingness to fight for what's yours is ageless. David thought he was dealing with a lonely, grieving widow who would be easy to manipulate and discard. Instead, he met a woman who'd spent decades solving problems, protecting young people, and standing up to bullies. He picked the wrong house. He picked the wrong family. And he definitely picked the wrong woman. What about you? Have you ever dealt with family members who tried to manipulate or control you? How did you handle it? Share your stories in the comments. Sometimes knowing we're not alone is the first step toward taking back our power. Remember, you're never too old to fight for what's yours, and you're never too trusting to learn how to protect yourself.